Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the third day of our alternative fuels workshop. Today, the agenda is focused on the port sector and the challenges for the transition to the supply of new types of fuel, and mainly in the supply of electrical energy for ships. So it is, before we start, it is an honor to have with us our director, the director of European Maritime Safety Agency, Mrs. Maya. So I would pass the floor. Yes, thank you.
Good morning to all of you. I hope you had a pleasant evening here in Lisbon yesterday and the day before, although we are not that blessed with the sunny weather. So those connected to the workshop should not be that jealous, as normally we are exposed to jealousy. Good morning once again, and welcome to the third day of our workshop, which, as Yanis said, will be dedicated to one part of the greening transformation of maritime sector, namely the electrical solutions for the ports. So during last 2 days, you have deliberated the two possible choices for the alternative fuels for shipping, biofuels and ammonia. You have discussed it from different angles, from sustainability point of view, technical and operational, but equally so economical, and what is particularly important for us, safety. You have seen it is a complex issue, but nevertheless it has the potential to serve in our path to greening of maritime sector. In the context of that discussion, you have also discussed the port side of the usage or of the logistical chain when it comes to alternative fuels. I said at the beginning of our workshop that it is of utmost importance that when we discuss the greening transformation of maritime transport, we discuss both sides of the coin. So shipping and port should go hand in hand, and these projects are inevitably connected. That was meant also by our policy decision process, by our regulators and legislators, and ports are having their parts in the Fit for 55 package, both in the context of the decreasing of the environmental footprint of ports itself as the industrial complex, but also as the important part of the energy transformation and green transformation of maritime transport sector. We have seen that this is not an easy process. It is a complex process, particularly with the fact that so far we were dealing in ports with, when it comes to bunkering, with monoculture, more or less. You had heavy fuels or diesel fuels, only recently some LNG, but you were dealing with one bunker culture. Now we are talking about a variety of different fuels, which may mean also the different port areas to be deployed, different safety procedures to be followed, different suppliers, different skills. So it is not the process that is, it is a complex process. Nevertheless, by embracing the smart and innovative solutions, I know that we are going to reach the goal that is needed, and that is the greener and more sustainable maritime transport chain in total. One important aspect of this process is certainly those connected with the use of electricity and green electricity in port. In order to facilitate the process of the implementation of the projects relating to onshore power supply, and you have heard these days that at the moment we only have like 23 ports fully equipped with OPS. We have, in a cooperation with the European Commission and the industry, developed a guidance, a technical document which serves to the administration and to the port authorities and operators in development and implementation on OPS project. It is, I believe, a very thorough technical document which is going to be presented today in details by our experts. And I hope that it will be downloaded and used in practice as much as possible. Today, we are also going to hear from our port colleagues on the experience in implementation of the projects already in the practice. As you have heard these days, this workshop, this 3 days workshop, which we have dedicated to alternative solutions in port and shipping, is the beginning of the series. You may have heard that we are going to continue with this practice, and we are going to gather you soon again when we are going to discuss other types of possible alternative fuels. So with that in mind, I would encourage again a lively discussion today, which I have heard you had yesterday as well, when you were discussing some aspects of electrification, namely the transport of the electrical and other alternative fuel powered vehicles on board the vessels, and the storage of batteries on board the vessel as an important operational aspects. So today, let's concentrate on port side and the OPS projects in ports. I wish you a fruitful discussion and nice last day in Lisbon. Thank you.
Thank you, Maya. And I think, as just been highlighted by you, we have been discussing all these days about all the enablers for these new types of alternative fuel that we all trying to explore. So some of the prerequisites on the availability of the new alternative fuels, as we have highlighted already, relate with the technical challenges, financial opportunities, and regulatory developments. And in this regard, I think we can all agree that a very diversified landscape seems to be emerging, and this is the new challenge for the port sector. So today we have also a two-folded approach for the session. And at first sight, we would like first to concentrate in setting the scene. So in this regard, we have invited colleagues from the Commission. We have invited a representative from ESPRO, European Seaports Organization, which we will ask them to set the scene as regards the regulatory framework, as regards also the challenges that the port sector is facing. And then, of course, we will go to the ports, where we would like some representatives of the ports to present their own projects, their challenges that they're facing, and how they are addressing the challenges on these new technologies that we have discussed already. So in this regard, and without delaying more, I would like to invite to take the floor the representative from ESPO, and Mr. Walter Selen would like to present for us. So please, if you want, yes, thank you.
Let's try it. Good morning, everyone. Pleasure to be here with you this morning, and thank you very much to the European Maritime Safety Agency for the invitation for the European Seaports Organization to be with you here this morning. We also think it's a very timely discussion and a good moment to reflect on shoreside electricity, alternative fuels, and we think it's a very good idea to have a dedicated session focusing on their availability, deployment, and use in ports in the context of the ongoing legislative negotiations. My name is Walter Selen. I'm Senior Policy Advisor for Sustainable Development with the European Seaports Organization. We represent the interests of all European seaports on the European level. We have our members in all EU maritime member states, 22 of them, as well as in Norway. And we also have a number of observers in Europe and the countries neighboring Europe. Our mission and purpose is twofold. The first is to act as the first port of call for European policymakers in the European Union. To exchange with policymakers and transmit the expertise and knowledge of our members to the Commission and European Parliament and Council. And we also try to strive to provide a knowledge platform, a network for our members to exchange good practices and knowledge, especially helpful in these days when alternative fuels and shoreside electricity is so high up on the agenda. I think it's important to set the scene a little bit about what ports can and cannot do and what our members as port authorities and port managing bodies can do in helping facilitate the greening of shipping and the maritime sector as a whole. If you look at this little illustration we have here on the upper left-hand side, you have the port authorities, which is the ESPO members. They are fully responsible, of course, for the port operations within the remit of the Port Authority and their traditional areas of responsibility. But as you move further and further away from that traditional role of the ports will have less and less direct influence and say over what the other stakeholders in the port are doing. And I think this is important to recognize because it means that if we want to do greening and if we want to do it effectively, we need to involve all the stakeholders in the port. Port authorities are committed to being facilitators, enablers, and drivers in that work, but we cannot do it alone. So our central message is that we are partners in the green transition that's currently underway. And we, of course, for that reason, also very much welcome the ambitions set out in the European Green Deal and the subsequent Fit for 55 package that was published last year. And we support these EU ambitions on the basis of a strong environmental and climate mandate from our members as well. Yesterday, I was in Bruges presenting the ESPO 2022 environmental report. It's an annual report that we produce based on data from our members all over Europe. And we have a top 10 list that we produce each year. And we see for the first time this year that climate change is the #1 priority for ports. In the past 7 years, it's been air quality. But if you look at the top 3 priorities for ports, it's clear that we have quite a strong mandate, but also a strong need for ports to be part of helping address the various externalities generated by shipping and other operations in the port area at large. And adding on to that, of course, alongside the European Green Deal, you have various drivers in the sector and in society around us that are sort of pushing the urgency when it comes to greening, and of course also the various extreme weather events that we see associated with climate change that tend to hit ports very strongly, and often ports are first in line to be hit by, for instance, rising sea levels or extreme weather events. What this all results in is an increased focus amongst our membership on sustainability, and something that we're quite happy to see as well now be mirrored in the European Union with the various legislative proposals to address the emissions from shipping and to include shipping in the overall EU climate policy frameworks. Again, just to demonstrate sort of 3 key components that we see that need to be in line for greening the ports and the shipping stakeholders is to first start with the Port Authority. And then as you move away from the traditional roles and remit of the ports, you actually see that we have less direct influence as ports, but we need to involve the other stakeholders to a greater degree to actually achieve the greening that we wish to see. So to summarize what I was just trying to tell you, greening the maritime sector is complex. It will require a differentiated approach, and we've called for quite a flexible and pragmatic framework that is ambitious but still allows for some prioritization and for some differences within the application in the various ports around Europe, because no port is alike, and we need to give some leeway and flexibility for ports in actually achieving the various aims that we set out to achieve. What we have also said as ESPO is that we want to lead the way. we have been proactive as ports for a long time, trying to push the maritime sector to move forward faster. We called for the IMO to address shipping emissions in an ambitious way already back in 2018. But on the European level, we're also taking steps to committing to greening all the operations within our own remit as soon as possible, as well as lowering emissions at berth from ships by at least 50% by 2030. And onshore power supply, which we'll discuss more later in this presentation and today, will of course be part of the solution to addressing emissions from ships at berth. As was mentioned in the opening statement, we have also been part of developing the quick reference guide for shoreside electricity, working very closely with the European Maritime Safety Agency. Very happy to see that out now, and I think it provides crucial guidance to ports and to other stakeholders when trying to decide whether to deploy onshore power supply in their port. Last but not least, we also try to promote environmental good management from the bottom up through what we call the EcoPorts network, which is where we get the data from that we then use to produce our environmental annual reports. So to focus and zero in on Fit for 55, we want to see an ambitious legislative framework on the European level. We would also like to see that framework then drive effective measures on the international level in order to, as much as possible, avoid carbon and business leakage. And when it comes to Fit for 55, as I said earlier, and Green Deal, we welcome it very much. We would like to see the package be quite comprehensive. We would need to see the different puzzle pieces fit together when it comes to the files that are of relevance to maritime, shipping, and ports. And we would like to see shipping, of course, contribute in the most effective way to the overall EU ambitions to reduce emissions by 55% by 2030. Just to give a quick snapshot of the key files that ESPO are working on that are of relevance to ports. Of course, you have the proposal for the Alternative Fuels Infrastructure Regulation, which updates the existing directive to set out requirements for the provision of onshore power supply for ships, passenger ships, and container ships by 2030. And then we have a new proposal in FuelEU Maritime, which we very much welcome, which sets out then the requirements for ships to use the onshore power supply available in ports, as well as reducing their emission reductions reducing their emissions over time. In addition to that, we're also looking very closely at the emission trading system, EU ETS, and the Energy Taxation Directive, which we think could provide an important push towards OPS by providing a permanent tax exemption for electricity provided at berth. As I mentioned earlier, we're very much committed from ESPO's side to help facilitate the greening of shipping. It's a priority for us. We have called for an ambitious reduction path, and we were happy to see Parliament yesterday adopt quite an ambitious reduction path for shipping emissions. So we think this is a sea change in the sector, and we mean that we would like to see that we reduce emissions both during navigation and at berth, of course, and making sure that we have a coherent framework will mean that we have to match whatever is available in the port with requirements on ships to use what's available in port in terms of OPS and other fuels. And there cannot be any loopholes in that regard, because then we risk creating stranded assets without reducing emissions as much as we need to. So to that end, we need to coordinate, we need to plan, we need to have requirements and clear involvement from the shipping sector to actually communicate ahead of time what they need from us by what point in time and where in the port. And through that approach, we can then have a more prioritized deployment of OPS and alternative fuels. So to sort of summarize what we would like to see from onshore power supply, ESPO has consistently called for OPS where it makes sense. What we mean by that, we mean that we would like to see OPS deployed in the locations in the port where it would reduce emissions the most per invested euro. That means that we deploy it for the ship types that would have the largest emission reductions, where it is the most workable to have OPS as a solution, and where we know that there is a guaranteed user case to make sure that it's being used to the maximum. So OPS is an important technology to reduce emissions at berth, but we need to recognize that because it is costly and time consuming to deploy, we need to be careful in where we decide to deploy it within individual ports. We need to make sure that we have a flexible and pragmatic approach for that. And we've seen some wording included both in Council and European Parliament positions to allow for such prioritization. And from ESPO's side, now moving ahead to trilogues, we would like to see that wording be reflected in the legal text of the articles as well. So to summarize, where it makes sense, OPS must be fully used for the proper segments for vessels above 5,000 gross tons and above, and based on the time at berth, as per the Commission proposal as well. To give you a state of play of what's already available on onshore power supply, again, returning to the environmental report that we published yesterday, we find that this year in 2022, 55% of the surveyed ports have OPS available at one or more berths. That means in absolute terms that 51 ports have OPS at one or more berths out of the ports that we surveyed. If we look at what type of OPS to have available, we see that close to half of the surveyed ports have high voltage installations available in the port, which is of course important because it would mean that you can supply OPS to seagoing vessels and larger vessels. We see also that all the surveyed ports provide OPS through fixed installation, which again underscores the need to enable prioritization and coordination regarding where you deploy OPS in the port. Of course, there are also some ports that provide mobile installations, but this is a minority in comparison to the findings we find in this year's report. Looking forward, in the next 2 years, we see that close to half of the surveyed ports plan to deploy OPS, either their first OPS installation or additional ones to what's already available. So in all, I think it's quite clear that there's a clear momentum and commitment from the ports, from the bottom up, but also through meeting AFID requirements to deploy OPS in the coming years. And what we need now, of course, is to ensure that we have demand for that OPS and that it's being effectively used everywhere it's available. What we need on top of that is funding to make the deployment of OPS possible. We see that there has been no cases of OPS being deployed without at least some public funding. On average, 50% is needed or more. That raises, of course, significant costs in general, and we have seen that the Commission themselves estimate that we would need around 7 billion to deploy OPS, in line with the Commission proposal. Depending on the outcome of the negotiations between Parliament and Council, the sum could be larger, of course. So we need to, of course, make sure that we have the available funding on the European level and the member state level to help deploy this, because port authorities will certainly not be able to fund all of this on their own. There have been welcome steps to set up different structures for funding already, instruments proposed by the Commission. We are also very happy to see that earmarking of dedicated revenues are on the table in trilogues for emission trading system, where we think it makes sense to replicate what's being done for aviation sector with earmarking revenues for their decarbonization. That could be replicated for maritime and ports to make sure that we actually support the greening of the sector by using the revenues generated by emission trading. Secondly, we also need to make sure that we talk more with each other. All the stakeholders need to be at the table when it comes to deploying OPS in terms of what's the timeline, by when would you expect to have OPS? Are you going for an alternative solution? What are your power needs at berths, your standardization needs, etc. Otherwise, we risk not only running out of money, but also using the money in an inefficient way. And we simply do not have the time nor the money to do that. Lastly, we would also like to see additional monitoring on the availability and use of OPS on board vessels. We already have monitoring taking place on the European level through the European Alternative Fuels Observatory for OPS available in ports, but we think that to allow better planning and coordination between supply and demand, we could do the same thing for OPS availability on board vessels to make sure that we can plan ahead as much as possible. I was also asked to give a brief overview of the state of play for alternative fuels in ports. I know that was the topic of Tuesday's and Wednesday's discussion, but just to give you an idea of where we stand as ESPO, we see ports as crucial hubs of renewable energy in the future. We think that we have an important role to play there as landing spots for renewables. We are trying in many different ways to contribute to the energy transition, the green energy transition that's ongoing. We're important providers and producers of clean energy solutions. We're also offloading points for offshore renewables, as well as hubs of sustainable cruise, as well as key nodes for circular economy, which of course makes sense also in the context of the production and the provision of biofuels. So we have an important role to play in that aspect as well, because we are where a lot of the various alternative fuels come together. But it's crucial to say that we do not have a direct say, of course, as port authorities regarding what type of fuel is always available, what's being produced in our port. We're usually landlords, and it's up to the clients, the terminals, the shipping lines as well, to decide which path they want to go down. And that's also why we would like to avoid having top-down requirements for specific alternative fuels provision in ports at this stage in time. To give you some statistics, we see that for 39% of European ports, energy-related traffic accounts for 1/3 or more of their total throughput. So ports are very much in the energy business already. We see that a lot of the production of renewable or of fuels and energy that's going on in ports concern renewables, solar, biomass, wind. And we see that over half of port managing bodies initiate or facilitate the production of renewable energy in the port. So we are already well underway, and we think that these efforts from the bottom up need to be supported and facilitated on the European level to make sure that we can get all the way. Some figures from the environmental report again are, we had a sample of 92 ports answering questions, including whether they had projects under development for clean fuel infrastructure or alternative fuels infrastructure. We see that over a third of ports are working with hydrogen, around 12% on ammonia, 16% on biofuels, and around 10% on synthetic fuels. Which is, of course, very much a good sign already. But we need to, again, look at the new needs and issues that arise as well with the provision of alternative fuels. You have lower density of the fuels and higher safety risks associated with some of these fuels, which are, of course, for instance, addressed by the EMSA guidance on ammonia published recently. Very welcome. Just to give an idea, we did a study with Deloitte on the space needs required by alternative fuels, which found that ammonia needs 2 times as much space in the port as fossil fuels do, whereas hydrogen needs 3 times as much space. What this means in practice is that space, which is already a scarce resource in ports, will become even more scarce. So again, we do not have the luxury of deploying a sort of a fuels a la carte approach where every type of fuel is available in each port. There simply will not be enough space to do that. Standardization specifications for how to use and supply alternative fuels is, of course, still needed, even if a lot of good work is underway. And operational safety is, of course, a major priority for us in that regard. We would also like to see, again here, a similar approach as for OPS when it comes to alternative fuels. We would like to know more about what is the current demand, if any, for any of these alternative fuels, ammonia, hydrogen, methanol, so that we can, again, plan ahead and try to figure out where we could deploy these fuels already. So, how this all relates to Fit for 55, we again think it's too early to introduce binding requirements for provision of, for instance, ammonia and hydrogen in EU legislation. We would rather like to see a much more positive, supportive bottom-up approach where we ensure that there's enough funding and technical support available for ports looking at deploying these various fuels. We recognize also that there's currently a clash with the energy crisis between short-term priorities of ensuring energy supply and availability and longer-term greening ambitions. And this is something that ports need to juggle with, and something that actually makes the whole transition a bit more difficult. And that's something we need to recognize as well in terms of giving enough strategic support to ports in this work. Lastly, just to say that we need, again, investments for the deployment of alternative fuels as well, not only for OPS, and of course, depending on what's required by future legislation, this will be significant amounts that will be needed. So we need to be aware of that as well in this work. Lastly, just to give you an idea of what we're doing already to encourage greening from the bottom up, except deploying OPS and alternative fuels, there are also some other initiatives. We developed a good green practices database to gather all the various projects that are underway all over Europe when it comes to not only alternative fuels, but also overall greening efforts, port-city relationships, etc. We have several hundreds of good practices already, so we're very happy to see that projects are underway. I think, again, that underscores that we do not at this stage think it fruitful to have binding requirements because there are already a lot of good work being done to deploy alternative fuels where they will be needed. Lastly, we also offer what we call differentiated dues, or various incentives for greener ships, front runners that are taking various steps to, for instance, reduce air emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, sustainable waste management. Close to 2/3 of surveyed ports provide such differentiated dues this year, whilst that's only a very, very small share of the overall operational costs of vessels. It's more an important signal, and I think a clear message from ports that we are willing to do our best to encourage greening from shipping. And a third of ports are also planning to introduce such port dues in the future. So just to recall, the central message of this presentation is that we're partners in the green transition. Work is already well underway to deploy OPS and some alternative fuels where it makes sense in ports. And we would like to see a supportive legislative framework on the European level to continue to make this possible in support of the European Green Deal ambitions. Thank you very much for your attention and look forward to fruitful discussions today.
And thank you, Walter. I think we all agree that ports are very important players within the value of the maritime chain, where they, of course, have a lot to offer and a lot to work with other players as well for this uptake and the transition to cleaner sources of energy as well. I would like to hear more about, let's say, the EMSA's contribution to this, which is, of course, we're talking about the SSC guidance document that we have produced, but this is something maybe that can follow when we will have a discussion on that. But ESPO and other players as well contributed significantly to the production of our SSC guidance, of the EMSA SSC guidance document. And one of the players as well was the Commission. And today we have two representatives from the Commission here. In fact, one of them was an ex-EMSA colleague who will present our guidance as well. But before that, as we are still in the set of the scene, I would like to invite from the Commission side, Mr. Konstantinos Rigas, who will give us, or who will highlight the Commission objectives as regards this part for the ports that we are discussing, plus also in relation to shoreside electricity objectives and goals from the Commission side. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Konstantinos Rigas. I work in DigiMove in the Ports and Inland Waterways unit, and today I would like to give you the angle of the policy, if you want. I'll try to be brief in my intervention. It's a pleasure to be in Lisbon. It's a pleasure to be in EMSA, in an workshop organized by EMSA, which are always very interesting, very topical, and very to the point. And today we're talking about one of the most critical issues that we are facing, that is environmental performance, sustainability, and climate change. This is day 3 of the workshop, so we've had the opportunity to exchange views on the vessel side, what's happening there. So now it's time for the ports, sometimes the unsung hero of the industry. And we're going to talk more about shoreside electricity, onshore power supply, cold ironing. There are subtle differentiation in these terms, but sometimes used interchangeably. Now, we're all aware of the challenges that we face, and we have started to see more and more the impacts of climate change. Therefore, we need to act, and we need to act now. So, from the EU side, the European Green Deal has set clear legal obligations for this. Now, of course, its sector is different. Its sector has their own role to play in this transition to a new and sustainable economy. In our sector, this is maritime, and this means we would like to see clean vessels and we would like to see clean ports. And I'm very happy to note that the ports have taken up this challenge and they're ready to act, and they're already acting. Now, the work relating to green ports has been set out by the European Commission on the on sustainable and smart mobility strategy, which lays the foundation for how the transport system can become green, transform digitally, and become more resilient to the future challenges. This strategy clearly recognizes the important role of ports for the European economy and its citizens. And we did see this important role of the ports during the recent crisis, which ports managed to address by demonstrating their adaptability and their resilience. So, in order to achieve our stated aim, the Commission has decided to follow multiple approach to take into account, of course, individual nature of ports. Therefore, in July 2021, as part of the Fit for 55 package, and in order to implement, of course, the European Green Deal, we propose 2 legislative initiatives that are of particular importance today. The first is the Alternative Fuels and Infrastructure Regulation, which replaces the previous directive. And the second is the so-called FuelEU Maritime Initiative. These measures together will aim to make our vessels and our ports cleaner. So let's look a little bit at shoreside electricity, or OPS, and why did we want to focus more on OPS. Now, on the one hand, electrification to vessels in the port will address not only CO2 emissions, but also other pollutants like NOx, SOx, etc. And we should not forget that ports are very often close to, or sometimes even in the heart of cities. Yesterday, I bumped into a study which quoted that around 90% of ports in the EU are very close or in a city. So we are having a double goal here. On the other hand, OPS is a mature technology. The European Alternative Fuels Observatory includes already a long list of OPS installations in EU ports, 20 or 30, and this is increasing. And some of those installations are there for more than 10 years. And from our side, the Connecting Europe facility alone has financed more than 20 actions under CEF1 with more than 150 million euros for ports all over Europe, big or small, north or south. And there is an interest for projects under CEF2, and we invite ports to continue expressing their interest and taking part in these calls. Therefore, unlike other alternative fuels in the port area, for example, hydrogen, this is a low-hanging fruit, so we can start seeing results much faster. Now, if we go and look into these two initiatives, they both target the most polluting vessels. According to size, above 5,000 gross tons, and for container ships, ferries, and cruise vessels. AFIR, in simple terms, what does it do? It introduces ambitious but necessary targets for the provision of OPS by looking at the ports that are in the Trans-European Transport Network, TEN-T ports, that have a minimum volume of traffic. And then it says, of that traffic, we would like to cover 90% of those calls from these categories of vessels with OPS by 2030. Now, of course, there are a number of technical exemptions there, like not to connect in the case of emergency. There's a limit of 2 hours. If the vessel is in the port for less than 2 hours, there's no point. Or when we have small islands, for example, we don't want to put extra burden on the electricity generation for these islands. And a couple more. But what is very important here to understand is that now this piece of legislation works together with FuelEU Maritime, which is there to create the demand for OPS. The situation with the previous legislation, the directive, was that we were waiting for the business case to arise. This is not here anymore. This disappears. We need to think on a completely different paradigm. FuelEU Maritime will create the necessary demand. And we also want to have a wide application of OPS so as to ensure that there's a level playing field among the ports. Now, we've heard quite a few misunderstandings on what the text contains. So let me be very, very clear here. The proposal does not require OPS to be installed everywhere in the port. The fact that we ask only for 90% of the port calls gives a 10% flexibility margin for the Port Authority to decide how to allocate it as they see fit, depending on their own situation. And therefore, this 10% can be used to exclude areas of the port where vessels are going very rarely or there's no high demand. It is clear to remember that as each port is different, we cannot come with a one-size-fits-all legislation. And we also know that the port environment is a very complex environment where a lot of stakeholders need to coordinate and work together. they have to work like a symphony orchestra. And the Port Authority, the managing body of the port, is the conductor of that orchestra. And in the end, it's the member state that has the final responsibility to make sure that these requirements are covered. So it is also very important in this respect, and as Walter said, to have a good discussion between all the stakeholders. And I will remind you the Port Services Regulation, which provides for that, provides for a mechanism of consultation. So, dear colleagues, more than a year ago, we participated in a very successful workshop of EMSA, which focused on the preparation of the EMSA guidance on shoreside electricity to port authorities and administrations. This has been a tremendous and important work that has led to a final document that we believe will be a useful reference in this very complex, and we understand that, challenge and undertaking of providing electricity to vessels. It is clear also that this document is coming at the right time, both at EU but at international discussions as well, as the framework is developing quite fast. So this guide delivers on the objectives of the sustainable and smart mobility strategy, and we are certain that will become a very important instrument in support for all the stakeholders. Now, before closing, I would like to thank again the EMSA colleagues for organizing, of course, an excellent workshop as always. I would like to thank them for their work and collaboration through the process of preparing the initiatives as well. And I would also like to thank very much, and in particular, Ricardo Batista for his dedication and drive in seeing the EMSA guide completed. Thank you very much, and I look forward to our discussions.
Thank you, Konstantinos, and thank you also for your kind words in relation to EMSA. So I think that I have a very clear understanding that there is, first of all, an uptake already for onshore power supply by the port side, but there is also a push for further increase of the OPS capacity within EU ports. And of course, having heard from ESPO as well, there is a clear call for more public funding, more probably regulatory facilitation of this uptake of onshore power supply. And in this regard, I think from our side as a technical agency, what we have tried to do in cooperation with you, with the stakeholders, with the Commission, and the industry, of course, was to develop the shoreside electricity guidance to address, of course, port authorities and ports in relation to facilitating this uptake for the OPS. I think you all know the shoreside electricity guidance, and we have let's say, the most competent person here to guide us through and to give us an idea, first of all, on how this document was prepared, what were the challenges of the document, what it addresses, and what are the expectations for the months and the years to come in relation to have this as a useful reference document for the industry and the maritime and the port authorities, of course. So Ricardo Batista from the Commission is with us as an ex-colleague from EMSA and working in my unit. I'm particularly happy to have him with us. And Ricardo, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Ioannis. My first word goes exactly to you and to the agency for having trusted me the responsibility of presenting, which was one of the last projects I was involved in the agency just before going to the Commission. Thank you very much for having trusted this task in me. I would like to thank Kostas for your kind words as well, and for the trust throughout the whole project, and for your patience, because this did take quite a while to be developed. The guidance on shoreside electricity is currently published, physically composed of 3 documents, part 1 and part 2, and a quick guide which includes the highlights and the key elements for the development of shoreside electricity projects in ports. The first part of the guidance is essentially a handbook of technical elements relative to the different technical elements that compose shoreside electricity projects, either for OPS or for battery charging from shore. And it is a descriptive highlight of the different equipment, including transformers, frequency converters, the very structural elements related to a cable management system, cabling, and pretty much an informative handbook of these elements of equipment. Being informative, its objective is to provide the general stakeholders, in particular ports, with informative elements on technology and what are, in fact, the different elements that need to be considered from an infrastructure perspective. Part 2, more related to planning, operational aspects, and safety, with the objective already to support the deployment of actual projects and operation of SSE facilities. The quick guide being a summary for a quick reference and for a quick read through in information of all the elements contained in the other documents. You see here that part 2, in fact, highlights that all the elements that are covered, the regulatory framework, responsibilities, project and feasibility, operation and safety. You will notice already what is missing: business case, environmental aspects. Environmental aspects are considered to be, let's say, upstream. So these were already identified. The benefits coming from the use of onshore power supply have been in the very origin of addressing this project, so they are not covered here. And the business case elements and the economical elements are considered to be case-specific and therefore difficult to cover in a best practice document. In terms of the project timeline, and it did take a while since the need was identified in 2019, and we received the request from the Sustainable Ports Forum and from the European Commission. And at the time, it was still vague with what would be the need in terms of this guidance. An initial scoping was made in 2020, already in the context of complementarity with the IMO OPS guidelines, which were then being developed. The objective was not to overlap this document developed in IMO, but rather to complement with elements that we've considered to be of added value. An initial technical exchange started with IEEE and in participation also in technical committees and understanding the elements missing also in standardization. And therefore the drafting work started with the 2 consultations, 1 workshop in 2021, beginning of 2021, and then the drafting exercise based on the consultations and also incorporating an online survey, which was conducted in the middle of 2021. At the same time, from 2021 and 2022, the regulatory framework, as Costas explained, with respect to the Fuel EU and to the Alternative Fuel Infrastructure Regulation, started to develop and is currently still under negotiation. So it was a parallel development of a structural piece that was considered to be important as ancillary to the regulatory development, and therefore this is the context for development of the shoreside electricity guidance. The objective is to address the whole elements composed from the port infrastructure to the ship-shore interface and the ship-side connection. You see here both contexts for onshore power supply and shoreside battery charging. being to highlight that both both are composed of slightly different elements. We're talking about onshore power supply when the ship is provided with electrical power to supply service needs and power demand while at berth, and shoreside battery charging when batteries on board are charged through shoreside infrastructure. And this can be done either with the transformer placed on the shoreside or with the transformer placed on board the ship. In the identification of the blocks in part one, it was considered to be of fundamental relevance to structure and to segment all the elements that compose a typical general onshore power supply, shoreside electricity installation. And therefore you have here the different elements from the power source to the different substations possible to introduce power distribution in the port, shoreside ship-shore interface, and also the elements that compose it. So that the structured approach in the guidance is followed by addressing each and every element. It was this structured approach that was followed throughout the guidance, which allows then to see that safety of the whole system needs to be the summation of each and every element safety level, and the scope of application of the EMSA guidance you see there in the dotted red square encompasses from the power or from the reception interface in the port down to the ship-shore interface, including cable management system and connection on board the ship. The different equipment, and the visible part of onshore power supply is typically the cable management system where the ship connects. But in fact, there is so much more, and the footprint of the installation on a port area is so much larger than just the cable management system that we felt the need to include in the guidance all these elements so that port authorities and administrations have indeed an idea on the impact that shoreside electricity installations may have and may plan accordingly. From the power transmission and cabling routing to the possible installation of electrical energy storage fields in the port, frequency conversion, microgeneration, all the elements related to cable management system and potential different architectures for substations in the port, from modular to fixed to a variety of other different elements that can be considered. These are all included in part one with the reference to the existing standards for certification of these elements. I make a note, electrical energy storage is in particular relevant when introducing microgeneration, renewable energy sources, but also when you want to have sufficient power, for instance, for charging battery vessels, when you don't have the sufficient power for fast charging, and then it is possible that the need comes to have electrical energy storage also in the shore side, and this is a solution that is already implemented in many projects. So in fact, when we talk about shoreside electricity, we talk about OPS, onshore power supply, shoreside battery charging, but also we included battery swapping, taking into consideration already some projects that exist based on this architecture for electrical energy storage swapping. Shoreside power banking or installation of large groups of battery storage in the port, and port generation, microgeneration, either ashore or in floating units. All of these have slightly different elements, and the intention of this breakdown, as you see here and in the single line diagrams, The intention is to then address each and every element from a regulatory gap analysis perspective. What is missing? What should we develop? But also from an operational perspective and from a safety assessment perspective, so that the risk assessment scope could include the failure modes associated to each and every element that you have included in these diagrams. And this is the advised approach, that for each system that is considered, that this breakdown is performed, so that for each element and equipment, the different failure modes can be considered and can be addressed for improved reliability and improved safety. This table provides an interesting overview of what we've assessed to be the current state of the regulatory framework in terms of standardization for interconnectivity, interoperability, data communication, and international context and regulatory framework. You will see that the green is where we have everything pretty much in place, and we have that for high voltage short connection. We don't have yet for low voltage, because 8005.3 has been in a draft state for quite a while, but is now currently being finalized. In terms of inland waterways, we've also included the standards relevant for connection. And in terms of battery charging, the scenario is slightly more incomplete. We have, however, already information that IEC and IEEE, they are both working on 8005.4, which will be addressing the battery charging connectivity and elements related to standardization for interoperability of battery charging systems. So we will see very soon all these yellows and reds being filled in as also the regulatory framework develops. The objective is to slow down the tendency of tailor-made shoreside battery systems that have been deployed and being developed throughout, I would say, Europe, but in fact the world. Responsibilities of the different stakeholders involved in shoreside electricity projects, the guidance with the support from stakeholders involved tried to map the different stakeholders present in both the development, but also remarkably in the operation of shoreside electricity in ports. And then for each and every stakeholder, a list of responsibilities are suggested. And I'm not saying, because in fact the guidance is a non-binding, non-mandatory document, only tries to provide best practice for the ports to have some inspiration on what can be considered in the case of these projects. Ultimately, the objective of this section in the guidance is to facilitate communication between all parts involved in the project. And now, apologies maybe for the excessive detail. I'll try to focus only on the letters that are in bold. We try to map a standard generic project development for shoreside electricity project to address project management and feasibility for this project. We have as an important step already the preparedness of the different stakeholders involved in a collaborative environment, talking with each other, addressing the challenges already from a very early stage, scoping, and then we start the planning and design initially by power demand estimation. And this is a key cornerstone of all the development of shoreside electricity projects. Only by addressing and calculating, assessing the typical power demand profile in a port, it is possible to design a sensible and adequate onshore power supply installation or battery charging. For this, we need the grid, we need supply, either with the grid or micro generation solutions. and then develop different engineering options to integrate the power into the port and to distribute it internally in the port in a general development of the port grid. Safety risk studies, feasibility analysis, and then engineering, procurement, and contracts follow with detailed engineering project and so on, and all the other steps more detailed up down to the operation. And this life cycle for the shoreside electricity projects is then detailed in the guidance with different elements for inspiration of the ports to take into consideration how should they structure their approach to these projects. Then on operation, what the guidance does is it looks at the IMO OPS guidelines and does not reinvent the wheel. So the EMSA guidance does not introduce new elements which are not already in the IMO approved OPS guidelines. What the EMSA document does, it puts it into a diagram and tries to make a flow out of the processes in order to be best visualized and understood, introducing the concept of first connection certification, so that a ship that goes to a port for a first connection gets the compatibility assessment, and then it gets an OPS green card in order to have subsequent connections in a more streamlined way. So this is a concept proposed, of course, on a non-binding way, but trying to suggest how the ports could manage this important element. And finally, reaching the last slide, as I've anticipated in beginning to you, one of the reasons of breaking down the system is to assess the different failure modes on each component, and then from the grid to the shoreside infrastructure, to the interface, and even to the ship side, different things can go wrong. So the guidance tries to, without being too descriptive, but tries to highlight to you which are the possible failure modes that would need to be addressed in a proposed scope for a risk assessment. Of course, there will be always pieces of the puzzle to missing in the guidance. So one of the elements that I would like to share with you is the guidance is an open document. Just in the first page on both part 1 and part 2, you have the email for EMSA information unit. You can send suggestions, you can send corrigendums, you can send anything that will be then included in this lively and updated process of the guidance, which is intended to be a live document to help you. Again, thank you very much, in particular to the agency for allowing me to present the guidance today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ricardo. To be honest, my first impression about the document when we were discussing and we were still under development of the whole project was that with fear. Because you may understand also from the presentation, but for those of you who are familiar with the document, it's a highly technical, I would say also complex document, but it's a combination of knowledge, experience, know-how from different players, which somehow puts together all the relevant necessary information that could facilitate the uptake of OPS. Therefore, as well, what I would say, how I became confident on the document was with the process that was behind of the development of the document. So it was so exhaustive, so much consultations involved, and so many stakeholders as well. It was not only a work from Ricardo, not only a work from EMSA team, but it was so much collective and so much knowledge put in the document. So finally, I think the outcome is what we would like to say, that it justifies all the work that has been done and all the process behind. Yes, and I would actually I would like to ask you something as well, but which basically, before I open the floor, because we have many ports around here, and specifically some ports that they will present their business cases as well after the coffee break. I would like, before giving the floor to the ports, asking for their feedback in relation to the guidance, because it's nice for me to say as EMSA that we like it and it's a useful document, but I would like to hear from the ports. But before that, Ricardo, and giving you the floor, what do you think should be, apart from what you want to add maybe to what I have just said, but how do you see the development of the document in the near future, and how do you see the utilization of the document as well for the years to come or for the months to come?
Thank you. Even before, Yanis, thank you for the words. Even before addressing your question, and this is the problem of not having any written speeches or notes, I would like to thank Walter, because throughout the process, the ports were essential. And without the experience that has been shared through the European Seaports Organization, and especially in the person of Walter, who supported very much the work, it wouldn't have been possible. And I would like to make that recognition. Thank you. How do I see the document used today and in the future? So I believe that today, the objective of the document is really to provide a possible inspiration for the ports to approach the technical challenges of shoreside electricity. The economical business case dimension will surely be one of the concerns. You won't find much support in this guidance for that particular point, because this is very much port specific, and it would be difficult to address it specifically in this guidance. Also, this needs to be understood in the context of a regulatory framework that is bringing an obligation. So the regulatory framework is bringing an obligation for the infrastructure to develop on the shore side and on the ship side. So, in fact, the business case is an important element, but the main aspect was to provide technology information, safety-related information, and operation. The document needs to be read in conjunction with the IMO OPS guidelines that provide the operational relevant elements for the ship side and for the interface. And I believe today it aims to be a repository of best practices. But as we say, best practices develop. So the way I see the document in the future is definitely as a possible, hopefully a possible round table for operators, for the ports to bring in their experience and say, this doesn't work this way, or we do it better in a different way. And I hope that we can be able to update definitely in that sense. Even today, we can look at it and we can find missing elements, but there will be always missing elements. The result of this work was collaborative from different stakeholders, and there were many involved in the consultations. I hope it serves as a result from collective sharing of best practices that we managed to promote and to integrate together. It will definitely develop because it's an open document. Thank you.
Thank you, Ricardo. I think you have said it also in your presentation that this should, and it is, a living document. So I think this is how we should see it in any case, since the technology is also developing and also the regulatory environment, as we said. But yes, apart from blessing our own, let's say, success, I would like to ask the stakeholders, and in this case, the main stakeholders like the ports, or of course anybody else who would like to take the floor, to give us their own perspective in relation specifically in this case for EMSA shoreside electricity guidance and their feedback on the document. So I would like to start first with the people who are still here with us. So anybody who would like to take the floor and give his own or her own perspective in relation to the SSE guidance? Who would break the ice? I know we have David from Malta here, which I wouldn't want to go, but I know that Malta has done a lot of work in relation to the OPS development. So could I?
Yes, of course. Good morning, everyone. Later on, I will be talking a little bit about the projects we're doing in Malta. I think the overall comment is it is very useful to have this reference document also for the non-technical people to have an oversight, because the engineers, and the electrical engineers and the software people involved, they know a little bit about, but in terms of the wider visibility and the people that we need to look into recruiting from the aspects of operations, I think it's a very useful reference document. And as was already said, with all the developments, it has to remain dynamic. And I am sure that in the coming years or months, maybe even before that, there may be scope for revision or updating. But in general, I think to have this, let's say, benchmark reference document on onshore power supply and shoreside electricity, it's a benefit to all those not only involved in this, but also those who want to know about it. So I think it's brilliant.
Thank you very much, David. And I think the message also comes from you that this should stay updated, a living document which will be somehow remain a reference technical document for the industry in this uptake confrontation for OPS power. Anybody else who would like the floor from the participants here or even from the chat? Yes. If there is no one from here, I would, yes, please. It's in Tanko. Have the floor.
Good morning, Madam. Good morning, Mr. Chairman. And also, I appreciate very much Ricardo's presentation. I represented the tanker owners and operators. When this book was published, we were very interested in, and we read through the entire book. We understand the main audience of this book and the guidance is the port authorities and administrations. But from our viewpoint as a shipping companies, it gives a very good bearing for us to know what would come, particularly from the European member states side. One observation, if I may, I want to share with you is speaking of the tankers. In the EU Maritime Fuel EU Maritime Directive, the implementation date is sometime in 2030, starting from container ships. But for tankers, if I with reference to the California regulations, we have only 2 years. Particularly if I have tankers on the spot market, then I have only 2 years to get ready for compliance with another part, the regulations on the another part of the world from EU. In our preparation or in our study within our membership, one of the things was the tankers have a particular operational profile compared to other ship types, such as container ships. Just one example is for container ships, they can have a very good connection location, say the midship area. So from your viewpoint, from the viewpoint of the port authorities, they can have a fairly good projection on where to put. For tankers, in the study carried out by DNV in earlier this year, even in a small area on Los Angeles and Long Beach, the profile, the dimensions of the tankers visiting that area are very different, starting from very small tankers up to VLCC and ULCC. So from their side from their perspective, they need to care for many different ship sizes. Not only the ship sizes, they can port alongside, starboard alongside, and the width of the waterways, and so forth. So in these guidelines, I appreciate that there is a lot of thought given to the flexibility and different sizes and the connectability to different ship types, different profiles, even one specific ship type. So from that sense, we were very grateful that the writers of this guidance and the stakeholders involved in this project gave a good thought on particular profiles of the ships. Speaking of myself, it is tanker. So this is just to share our perspective when we read this book for your note. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Intertango, also for the encouraging words. Of course, what is the success of the document? It also makes it challenging as well how to maintain it updated with all this information that includes. And Ricardo, would you like to address it as well? Yeah.
Yes, thank you. The fact is that the guidance covers connectivity into interoperability for the different ship types. In the EU regulatory development, only container ships and passenger ships, RoPax and cruise ships are going to be mandated to connect. Of course, it provides information on tankers as well, but we understand in the US the regulatory framework for the connection of tankers to OPS is developing faster, and so I believe the requirement for tankers in California to connect is coming soon. We've been involved also in some risk assessments that were done with the US authorities, and we understand the challenges for tankers to connect. Not only the size that you also mentioned, but also remarkably, in particular for oil tankers, the explosive atmospheres and the connection to tankers in the context of a very complex safety assessment that needs to be done. And also the fact that tankers, especially oil tankers, have boilers operating for a majority of the cargo pumps and for majority of systems on board. Replacing that or mitigating the emissions from the boilers would also need to be addressed. So the topic of tankers, in particular oil tankers, is something that at the moment in the EU is not going to be tackled. Maybe in a future revision we will, just pretty much following what in the California has been the pathway. But yes, so this the quick comment with respect to that. However, the guidance provides information because, again, some best practices already been developed. Port of Rotterdam has experience. Port of Gothenburg also has experience. So we've tried to incorporate some of that experience already into the guidance. Thank you.
Thank you, Ricardo. I see Intertango noting, and thanks a lot for this intervention. I would like to ask for your indulgence. I think we better take a few questions we have from the chat as well, and then we break for the coffee, if you agree, because then we will start with the presentations for the business cases from the ports, and I wouldn't want to stop the discussion now. So thank you. And Santiago, would you like to share? Yeah.
So, yeah, today it seems that the chat is more lively than yesterday. Most of the questions, I don't know what Ricardo said, but most of the questions are addressed to Ricardo. But we will start. I think the first request for the floor was from Tim from the Carnival Maritime Group, who was here yesterday in our panel, and he asked for the floor. Tim, please.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good. Just even a short feedback even from the, let's call it, owner side. So in the end, we are giving the demand, and I really appreciate even the presentation and the guidance. Just to give our feedback, it's important for us to speak basically the same language with the ports. I think from our side, we are since years now going in installations, which is also mandatory to have really a long-term outlook. Even public funding is a known word to us now. And that makes it quite complex to have a good outlook what we are planning to do on so many ships we have. So it's even good to see the rules in the guidance, which gives the port a good understanding where we in the end refer to. And just for me, looking to a cruise ship, it's mostly the IC, but I saw there also just red spots. I think this is something what is important for the ports to be updated if there is new rules coming in force. And for us in the end, as I said, we have several ports which we since years already work with them, but in the end, we are giving the demand. Sometimes we are the only cruise line or the only ship currently who's coming there. So basically, they're building on our purpose. And for the future with this guidance, for us and for the ports, it's good to speak basically the same language, even if the projects are starting, that we have the same paper that we can refer with the ports in which state they are and can give feedback in the end what is our demands. So just a little bit more blessed. But thank you again. It was really interesting to see.
Thank you, Tim, for your comment and remark about this. I think it's important to have the view also the operators. Now we have two questions addressed to Ricardo, but I think they can be for the Commission, so maybe Costas as well would like also to share the burden with Ricardo. So the first one is from Mr. Nick Lurking, and he's asking, did I get you right that the Commission is considering to put the different missing standards for OPS in a regulatory framework, directive, etc.?
Thank you. So, with respect to the standardization, we are not going to introduce this in the regulatory framework through a directive. This is the short answer. But Nick and the Dutch ship owners deserve a bit more detailed explanation on why we mentioned this. In fact, through AFIR, we have a standardization request to send Senelec to start working on standards that are missing. So we expect that with this request, we've promoted the standardization work to develop. I can already disclose that the work on the IEC 8054 for battery charging is developing. Low voltage short connection is very much close to be finalized according to information we have. So a lot of the reds that I've shown are going to be closed soon in yellow or green, and I believe that will be certainly one of the updates to do in the guidance in very short to medium term, but definitely not going to include this in a directive at EU level, because we need to promote an international standard which is available and applicable at international level. And we don't think that would be a role, or that would be the reach of an EU legislative instrument, including even if secondary legislative instrument. So we believe we need to promote the international standardization development instead. Thank you.
Thank you, Ricardo, for the answer. Very clear. The next question is from the port of Gdansk. I think, well, it's addressed to Ricardo, but I think it's for the Commission in general. And the question is the following. It was mentioned in the presentations that OPS in ports should be provided in places and situations where there is a need for power. OPS operations and maintenance must have a business case. Does the EU plan to develop a standardization of OPS energy billing energy bills and taxation? Not an easy one.
Thank you. This is actually 3 or 4 questions in one. But let's mention first the aspect of power supply and grid power availability. It is rather the other way around. We don't develop OPS where there is power. We develop OPS where there is a mandate established in this context in EU law, which will be established in EU law. So OPS needs to be developed where it is obligatory, where it is mandated, and then we need to develop all the necessary actions, negotiations, interactions with the transmission operators, with the distribution operators, in order to bring the grid to the port. And when I say bring the grid, I'm not mentioning bringing the cable, meaning bringing the necessary power level to the port. And this can be either by supply of direct grid, national grid electricity supply, or it can be through microgeneration in the port. So the question is very good. I would just like to make use of the question itself and put the context in a different perspective. So OPS is not developed where there is power availability. It's the other way around. We develop OPS and then we ensure power availability is supplied. With respect to standardization of bills and taxation, I can start by the taxation. So the taxation is zero tax in the Energy Taxation Directive. So there will be no taxes applied to electricity supplied to ships at berth, imposed by the Energy Taxation Directive. With respect to billing, energy bills, there is currently a framework for electricity and for electricity market. So we expect at industrial level, which will be in fact what OPS will be in industrial electricity supply, that the billing practices may be applicable. However, I introduce a disclaimer. This hasn't been subject of discussions yet, and I believe this is one of the aspects of implementation that we will need to address in order to make it less administrative burden and to facilitate to the operators the most streamlined and easy to implement billing or billing processes. I mean, so this is in fact something that hasn't been really addressed in detail at this stage.
If I can add, Ricardo, the provision of OPS is a clear service under the Port Services Regulation. It's treated the same as bunkering. So when we talk about billing, if we are talking about billing to the vessel itself, then the provisions of the regulation apply, and there are some elements as regards that they have to be transparent, non-discriminatory, etc., like they would be for the requirements for all other elements, but not standardization in terms of putting specific numbers here in the document and some others there. Thank you.
Thank you. Espo, you want to add something on that?
Just very, very briefly, thank you. Not to speak on behalf of the Commission, of course, but just to add on to what Ricardo and the Commission was saying. I think that the point made by Porto Gdansk is still a very important one. We need to recognize that the OPS requirements proposed by the Commission under AFIR and FuelEU will require significant increases in capacity of electricity in ports. The estimate is 15 times current capacity, according to the impact assessment. And it is, of course, in that context, very important for ports that the responsibility to provide the grid necessary, both the capacity and the infrastructure to the port area, will need to sort of be guaranteed, because otherwise it will be impossible for the port to provide the electricity required by ships. So from European Seaports' perspective, we've been working very hard to try and get some wording included in FuelEU Maritime and AFIR to clearly state that the responsibility for grid capacity and available electricity falls on the member state. It is not the responsibility of the port authority as such, and thereby also try to push for enabling that we have this grid capacity available by 2030 when ports need to supply the OPS as well. And we're quite happy to see wording to that extent included in the current positions of Council and Parliament, and hope to see it included in the final text agreed as well. Thank you.
Thank you as well. I think with this, we're almost about, but I think we have one more question to take, but this would be the final one because I think we all need some coffee as well. So we have one question in the chat coming from the Maritime Director of Cyprus, I think. Ioannis, good morning. I don't know if you want to take the floor or if you want us to read the question on your behalf. Okay, so please, Santiago, if you can then shoot.
Yep. So the question is the following. Could you please inform us about the status of the development of draft interim guidelines on safe operation of onshore power supply, OPS at IMO level? As far as I know, the work is still in progress and is expected to be finalized next year. So, well, in this respect, we can say that indeed the OPS guidance is not finalized yet. So there were some works in the SEC, but then there was a need, as far as I remember, to send it to the HTW subcommittee for further developments on the training standards as well, and then it will turn back again to the SEC to finalize next year. I think that was the plan. But that's, as usual, the best case scenario. So it can happen that it will be still delayed for another year. I just wanted to say that this IMO PS guidance is fully complementary to the guidance developed for ports. So it's a complementary work. It's not a competitor of this guidance, no. So well, Ricardo can add more if he wishes, but the idea is that the IMO is taking more the ship side, let's say, and this guidance is addressing the port side.
I think it's very clear. Ricardo, would you like to add? No, yes, of course. Yes, I think it's very clear that we took the port side in this case, and IMO is working for ships, but more or less we follow it up as well in the context of the IMO and the subcommittees that they're discussing. With this, I would like to close the morning session. I think, as I said, we all need some coffee. So having taking into account that we are delayed, I would like you to ask you to be back at 20 minutes past 11. So 11 past 20, we return back. Thank you.
Hello, can you hear me? Hi, Monica, can you hear me? It's great. Perfect. See you in a bit. Thanks.
Hello. Welcome back to the second part of today's meeting. First and foremost, I would like to welcome the speakers that we have today from the port sector. We have with us today, either presentially or online, three representatives from specific ports in the EU, who they will present their own business case on the measures they have undertaken in order to address the challenges for in this sector, in their sector, for decarbonization. So, and I would like to apologize in advance for my Greek pronunciation of the names. We will have Johan Homan from the port of Hamburg online. We will have David Bugeja from the port of Malta in presence here, and Mrs. Ana Arevalo from the port of Barcelona. So without delaying further, I would like first to invite to the floor the Port of Hamburg, Mr. Jochen Homan, who will give us their own perspective, their business case in relation to addressing the challenges we are discussing. So, Jochen, you have the floor.
Hello to everyone. I hope you can hear me well. Your pronunciation of my name was quite good, so I have heard that even worse. So first of all, I would like to thank EMSA for the organization of this great workshop. Initially, my colleague Manfred Lebmeier was invited, but he's bound in another event. So as mentioned, my name is Jochen. I'm working for the Hamburg Port Authority, and today I will present the shore power projects in the Port of Hamburg with respect to challenges and lessons learned. The port's perspective, as you will. Before talking about OPS, I would like to say some words about the Hamburg Port Authority. HPA takes care of the economic heartbeat of the Hanseatic city of Hamburg by providing modern and sustainable port management. We are responsible for the water and landside infrastructure, improving safety and profitability at the port, as well as managing property, planning and implementation construction projects like onshore power supply stations. Next slide, please. For those who are not familiar with the Port of Hamburg, we are located in the north of Germany, connected with the North Sea by the river Elbe. Ships arrive at the Port of Hamburg have traveled already 130 kilometers into the hinterland. The Port of Hamburg not only handles containers, we are a multi-purpose port handling all kinds of goods and serve an extensive hinterland via rail, feeder ships, inland vessels, and trucks. We're a city port surrounded by residential area, which brings along certain challenges. As mentioned from Walter, air quality is a big issue, also for the city of Hamburg, and shipping is one of the big sources of air pollution. By looking at the ship emission data, we figured out that 3/4 occur while ships are berthed. Besides air quality, of course, climate change is one of the drivers why we're heavily looking into onshore power supply. Next slide, please. Before I will talk about our ongoing onshore power projects, I would like to give you some facts and figures about the Port of Hamburg. I don't want to go into every detail, but I want to pinpoint your attention to some facts which are important to keep in mind talking about OPS later on. As Europe's third largest seaport, we receive more than 7,000 port calls a year from seagoing vessels, with more than 800 calls from vessels with a length of 330 meters or more, so the really big ones. To handle all these ships, we have about 280 berths for seagoing vessels. That's quite a lot if we would talk about port-wide onshore power supply. Next slide, please. I really feel honored to present our activities in terms of onshore power supply, but I think it is not a coincidence that we were asked. When it comes to onshore power supply, the Port of Hamburg is quite a front runner, at least in Europe. Back in 2016, we achieved our first milestone by building the first onshore power facility for cruise ships in Europe. We have seen the picture on the left before in Ricardo's presentation. This is our OPS station in Altona, 12 MVA, 6.6 or 11 kV, 50 or 60 hertz, an investment volume of 10 million euros. This was our first station, and we decided to expand onshore power to all our 3 cruise terminals and 4 container terminals as well. Not in every berth, but where it makes sense most. Next year, the first installation for container vessels will go online. The other will follow in the coming years. Next slide, please. Okay, let's talk about challenges. With the following slides, I would like to illustrate some of the challenges we faced. Most of them are related to container terminals because that's where we have our expertise. Looking at the right picture, you see that the space of container terminals is very limited. On the left side of the picture, you see the container ship, which almost looks like a wall. And on the right side, you see the container bridge. The space in between is the space where you can put your cable management system. That's not a lot, and you need good engineers to design a suitable solution to facilitate these cables you can see on the left pictures. Next slide, please. Second challenge, variety of mooring positions. Ships are moored somewhere alongside the quay. To install a cable management system, which is in the right position, you have to know where the ships are usually moored. We looked at historical data and the aft meter mark where the ships are positioned. In the left example, we looked at all kind of vessel sizes, and it is almost impossible to find any mooring pattern on this terminal. This means in reverse, the provided OPS to provide OPS for all these ships, you need a cable management system which is maximum flexible. On the right example, which is another terminal, we focused on vessel lengths larger than 300 meters and compared different years. What you can see is that even if you found a pattern, so for example, a lot of ships moored on the 600 meter mark, it can change during different years. What I want to say by sharing this is that you either need a cable management system, which is maximal flexible, or you need the willingness of ship owners and terminal operators to moor the ships in the right position. Next slide, please. Another challenge we face is the presence of high and low voltage ships at the same berth. The big ones usually have 6.6 kV, and the small vessels have something around 400 volts. If a regulation comes in place where we have to provide infrastructure to both of them, we have 2 systems running on the small space between the ship and the container bridges. I showed you some slides before. Another solution would be to have one system which can serve both high and low voltage ships, but this is not on the market yet. Next slide, please. The next challenge I would like to mention is the data availability. For example, the OPS readiness of ships. There are databases indicating this information, but these databases are sparsely filled, and we identified that this information is not always correct. So we don't know exactly which ships are able to use OPS or not. Talking about the positioning of the cables, which comes from the ship to the shore. They cannot just be located at the aft of the ship. It also can be closer to the bridge. And it also can be on starboard or on port side. So there are 4 options where the cables can be located. Information on that are not available in any database we know. Information about the energy demand is needed to calculate the amount of energy you have to reserve beforehand or to forecast CO2 emission reductions. The IMO greenhouse gas study gives indication of the energy demand of different ship types at berth. But we figured out that the energy demand is highly call specific, and we cannot use these numbers for Hamburg one-to-one. It is, for example, influenced by the number of reefer containers loaded and weather conditions. The information of reefer containers loaded is not available for us. Next slide, please. Some last words about financial and regulatory challenges. I think it's not a secret anymore, but there's no positive business case on OPS at the moment. At this point, I would like to mention that from my point of view, OPS is not a chicken and egg problem. At the moment, expensive green energy is in competition with cheap fossil fuel, and even if the ship and the shore is ready for a connection, it is not said that it will happen. The willingness to pay is quite limited. We see that the cruise industry has more willingness to pay higher prices for energy at berth than container liners. Looking at the regulatory challenges, we welcome an appropriate regulation on the use of OPS because it levels the playing field. But we also think that OPS is not the silver bullet. What we are aiming for is a goal-based target like zero emission at berth and OPS where it makes sense, not only for container and passenger ships. As I said in the beginning, we have about 280 berths for seagoing vessels. Some of them are used just a couple of times a year. It would be insane to build OPS for all these berths. Another challenge we have to face as a first mover is to bridge the gap between now and a regulation. We have the supply, but the demand is very limited. I think this is enough for the moment about challenges. As a last point, I would like to give some remarks on our lessons learned. Next slide, please. In Germany, our national regulation did not meet shore power requirements and needed to be adjusted. For example, we had to change German energy law. Initially, the ultimate consumer was the ship, so they had the possibility to choose energy supplier every call. I don't know how long it takes in your country, but in Germany, it took quite some weeks. That was not practical at all. We achieved that the OPS station is the ultimate consumer, so we can choose the energy supplier. Another lesson we have learned is the heterogeneous demand side and willingness to pay. This I already mentioned at the challenge. We think that regulations like the CII will also influence the willingness to pay because it can be a cheap measure to get a better CII ranking. Energy prices. Pushes previously already challenging business models closer or even over the edge. Terminal commitment and commitment on board are crucial. talked about the mooring position, which is set by the terminal operator. It might be easier to find the right mooring position if the terminal operator has also an interest that ships are using OPS. What we also learned is that the pre-qualification of ships is much easier if the people on board a ship are committed to OPS. I think I also mentioned the last one in my challenges. Being an early mover is a constant uphill battle. Next slide. With this, I would like to thank for your attention.
Thank you, Johan. And thank you for your presentation and presenting us the model, the state of play, but also the challenges that you're facing as a port at the front line, I would say, for greening the model further using these innovative technologies. And in this case, specifically, we're talking about OPS. I took note that apart from some very complex, I would say, technical challenges that we are all facing, ports are facing, there are challenges even like about the space within the ports in relation to these new technologies. And of course, it all comes down, if I understood well, to the financial challenge of how to finance innovative solutions, how to seek for resources, and how the regulators could facilitate funding, but also the regulatory regime for further development of these kind of technological solutions. I think we have member states here and the Commission that may like as well to address it further. But before that, and before we go to the Q&A session, I would suggest that we continue with the presentations from the other ports, and then we take it all together. So thank you, Johan. I think I have David here in the venue. So I would like to ask Malta to come to the floor and present their own business case in the same context. Thank you.
Good morning once again, and thank you for the opportunity. I think we'll see quite a few synergies with what our colleague from Hamburg has just explained. A little bit of overview on the objectives of why we are working on onshore power supply in Malta. It is not just to meet the EU and global decarbonization objectives, targets, and legal obligations and mandate, as was mentioned, but we also see it as contributing to Malta's own low-carbon development strategy. There is the social dimension of environmental projects aimed at improving the quality of life and health of not only the Maltese, but also of visitors, because one of our pillars in economy is tourism. So this relates especially to in the cruise sector and the port community. It's to tap also effectively on the funding opportunities that exist in this sector, and also because we think that it will, even if not now, but later on, it is an element for ports' competitiveness. Today I will talk about 3 onshore power supply projects that are currently very much advanced works in progress in Malta. The first one is the provision of the high voltage system in the port of Valletta Grand Harbour that presently caters for around 300 cruise liners a year. And that's mainly cruise liners here that we are addressing. The second one relates to the container shore connections in the Freeport terminal in the port of Marseilles. And the third relates to another project where we are extending the high voltage system and also the low voltage to other areas that are not covered in projects 1 and 2. So I will first speak a little bit about what we're doing in the container terminal, which complements quite a bit of what our colleague has just been talking about. Within the scope of Malta, and one I think needs to appreciate the significance of port business in Malta as compared to the size of the island and population. But with the container terminal, which is one of the top transshipment hubs in the Med, we're dealing with 1,600 ship calls scheduled annually, mostly on liner services, with 2.4 kilometers of quay and a number of equipment that can be seen in the presentation. This is showing where the first project at the Freeport will take place, and it is addressing two particular terminals which cater for the main line 400 meters up to 400 meters to 130 up to 400 meter container ship, being Terminal 1 and Terminal 2 North Quays. As an overview, the system is in line with the international standards for container ships. It is modular to accept future expansion because, as I said, this is we're not excluding expansion later on. Capability of providing the necessary voltage and power for the container ships at 60 or 50 hertz. We are aware that with ships there is a little bit of fluctuation, and again, similar to the operational and space requirements, the connection on Terminal 1 will be a fixed connection box on the quay, but in the case of Quay 2, it needs to be a mobile cable unit with a range of 200 meters of quay to allow the flexibility that is required. In terms of the system requirements, it is sourced from the distribution center that the local energy provider has specifically for the Freeport. And also, what I think is interesting, and maybe something we will probably be talking about later on, it has the possibility for container ships to export to the grid in case of green ships, such as LNG ships or other ships that may have excessive power when they are in port, and therefore most of their machinery is not active. The container terminal system is expected to come in service in 2024, and the budget is 13 million. Talking about the social dimension, you can see a bay very close with people enjoying the beach and a fantastic view of a container terminal. Moving on to the Grand Harbour Clean Air project, I think, as I said before, apart from the mandatory obligations, there is a big social element also in this project. The project caters for cruise liner berths. Basically, it will be able to cater for 5 specific cruise berths that can take the largest cruise vessels presently in service. It is a project worth 33.2 million, of which 85%, a significant amount, is under the Connecting Europe facility. In terms of magnitude, this includes 22 kilometers of underground and subsea cable network, one of the challenges on a small island, 2 frequency converter stations. It's projected, obviously, to also be very effective in the reduction of NOxes, and this will go down by 27%. And we expect this to be in service by, hopefully, middle of next year. This is a route showing, in the quite some challenges in a very historic, fortified natural harbor, where there are areas where the cables had to be passed, let's say, very close onto the jetties, but in other areas, for permitting, environmental, historical reasons, we had to make quite significant diversions. Therefore, having an effect on the cost of the project. And also, as you can see in the orange line, we actually needed to also do a subsea route to connect the north side to the south side of the harbor. Just a basic schematic of where the power is coming from. We have the national power station, which is using LNG as a fuel with a permanent floating storage unit, and we also have an interconnector to the EU grid via Sicily. Malta is also now working on a second interconnector with Europe to have more sustainability and more resilience. Then the network is fed into the north substation where we get the 33 kV, and then we have, in our case, the project requires 2 frequency converter stations, where frequency converter station number 1 will serve 4 particular keys, and the other frequency converter will serve the cruise liner on the south side of the port. Again, some key figures, because I think it's nice to understand the dimension of such projects and where all the money goes to. In our case, we're talking about 19 transformers, 4 frequency converters, 1,020 kilometers of cable, cubicles, SCADA with fiber optic systems, 2 control rooms, the safety and firefighting equipment permanently installed in respect to be able to deal with the whole building in terms of cooling system and to act as a retardant. All these go into the project. Here we see the 2 frequency converter stations that I mentioned before. On my left is a frequency converter station that is built on available land within just outside the parameters of the ports, of the terminals, because obviously terminals, as said before, are very reluctant to lose very important yard space. So we identified a position. And in the case of the frequency converter station on the right, this was another challenge because it is actually being built within an industrial shed, an industrial building, where that building is scheduled. So we have to build it inside, and at the moment we have to replace the roof and convert that building as part of the project. So it's a regeneration of the area, but inside we have located also the frequency converter. You can see here works underway at that particular converter station. And as you can see from the photo, a few days ago, Lindert was in Malta from EMSA, and we had a nice visit together to appreciate what's going on. Also, in terms of size, we took this picture also to give a perspective of the size of one transformer as compared to the size of a group of people. Some other works in frequency converter station 3. I think this shows, when you do these projects from scratch, the element of work and the element of challenges that go. Some pictures speak for themselves, I would say. This is some of the equipment that we will be using. These are the shore connections that will be on the quay in the respective terminals. Because of the flexibility, at some berths we will have 3 or 4 of these units, and then we will be using the Cavotec mobile units to connect between the connection box and the ship to get the flexibility that will be required. The third project, which I find also very important, and I think it's very useful, is the extension of the high voltage shore supply to the ship repair facilities, and also the low voltage to other parts of the port, again, because we would like to have a future system, a future vision for the port where hopefully any ship can get service when required. And what we have realized with the repair facilities and the interaction with the cruise industry, I think whoever knows the business knows that cruise liners, even when they are at repair facilities, they now keep significant crew on board because it is more cost effective in terms of the logistics aspect of, removing from the ship hundreds and sometimes thousands of employees. And they are also doing some work on board. So while in a repair facility, cruise liners actually need to remain with the ship's power on. And therefore, we thought it would be very useful because you can have cruise liners at a repair facility for 3 or 4 weeks. And imagine if we can have those ships now on shore supply, the effect is going to be much, much bigger. And also, I think it brings another factor to the economies of scale and the viability. So this project will include, as I said, the high voltage. And here you can, to appreciate what we were thinking about, I am actually showing a picture of 2 cruise liners at the repair facility where they are there for several weeks to undergo refurbishment and class surveys and some other works. And they have thousands of persons living on board as subcontractors or as crew. And the low voltage, as I mentioned, in the other parts of the port, which system for the flexibility with the small ships, we have a lot of mobile units, including low mobile frequency converter units to get that flexibility within the port. About the challenges, some of the design and construction phase challenges were obviously the permitting process for works in locations like Grand Harbor in view of the historical heritage and cultural. The submarine cable, which also had a lot of planning and coordination, also in a busy port, trying not to disrupt the regular calling. The construction on operational keys and the coordination that obviously we want to keep the business going and to try and keep the terminal operators happy as well. And the control system and design to provide the flexibility and the safety standards that are required. In respect of the operational phase, it is the berthing plans to accommodate the high voltage connections and the communication and coordination with the terminal and the berth is very important, that it is a challenge. Also because in respect of the positioning, there is not very much flexibility in respect of ships. Obtaining technical data from shipping lines is not always easy. To carry out as much as possible preparatory analysis for the compatibility test and trial, and to try and gain time and momentum. And to achieve the gain and gain the expertise in connecting, and this connection is going to be another challenge that we envisage. What are the lessons learned up to now? I think when discussing with the respective shipping lines that are regular scheduled callers in your port, you need to identify the right person who with whom you can deal with, and usually in our business, that person is probably not always available and extremely busy. So we are always trying to catch up with each other, Although there is a lack of harmonization in the positioning of shell doors and the ship side, whether it's starboard or port, there are technical solutions to mitigate these measures, but obviously any solution comes at a cost and therefore at a premium, and nothing is cheap. And I think the lesson learned that gives us courage also is that shipping lines are on board. They are taking decarbonization very seriously and are keen to cooperate with us to use onshore power supply once it is available and commissioned. Another important thing is that the compatibility commissioning test must be carried out for each specific ship. And this is not as straightforward. So even although there are ISO standards and certain standards, there is quite broad and flexibility when it comes to the actual implementation on ships. In fact, with one particular potential customer that we were talking about in a particular port, they have already been 4 times and they have not yet finalized the compatibility test and are not yet ready to switch to shore supply. So clearly that's something that we need to think about. And the retrofitting of onshore power supply is on the agenda of a number of cruise lines. We are aware of them, but these will take time because they need to fit them in their schedule. They need to fit them in when they can keep the ship out for a bit longer in the dry docking period than is normal. And this costs around €1 million for each retrofit. Not excluding the challenges of finding where to locate the door and the connection room on board ships, but we are now aware that although there are these challenges, cruise liners that are not already fitted, they will retrofit in the coming years. For us, the way forward is we have to maintain this dialogue with all the stakeholders involved. We have to provide shipping lines with all the information and technical data available of our connection boxes, of the specifications, of connections with our engineers so that they can talk, the right language together. It is a learning curve, but flexibility and practicability is key, and we have to maintain that. And of course, in my case, I look forward to hooking up the first cruise liner that comes to Malta. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David, for your presentation. I think it was impressive, at least in my view, how dynamic, clearly you move ahead with the possibility to provide OPS, onshore power supply, in your port. And I think this is quite relevant since there are challenges ahead and you have identified a lot of them as well. So actually I was impressed also by this fantastic view of the shiny container terminal, which is quite in contrast with the rainy Lisbon here today. But of course that's something that relates only with the presentation. And also one more thing that I kept, which for me it was something new, that there will be a possibility also for large container vessels that they will be connected to onshore power supply in case there is an excessive power that they would provide also to the national grid. They would export to the national grid. And that's something impressive for me, which I'm not so familiar with this. And 1 million for retrofits for cruise vessels in order to gain OPS capacity. I don't know if this is a challenge or an opportunity. Okay, but I think now I can move forward. I think we have online the next presentation, which comes from Barcelona. And we have Mrs. Ana Arevallo. Bienvenida, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, perfect. Thank you very much. Thank you to EMSA for inviting us to be here. It's an honor for us, and it's a pity because I would like to be there with some of my colleagues, but it can't be this time. The good thing of the last one is that nearly everything is already said. So I will try to pass to start with a video and later on to pass my presentation a little quick in order to save time for the debate later. So Monica, if you can share the video, thank you. Okay, thank you very much. I will share my screen with you. And so can you see my screen now? Okay, like here. Okay, well, after watching, I love this video. I like because I think that it shows you more or less where we are and what are our goals. So I suppose that you have more or less in general idea about how we are implementing our OPS plan. Our starting point, and I sorry, but I will repeat something that, of course, it has been saying during the workshop. Our starting point is our commitment with sustainability. We are moving forward to achieve the neutrality in 2050, and we are developing a very ambitious energy transition plan. In the middle of this energy transition plan, as a key piece, we have our electrification plan. What we have at this moment is a very accurate calculation about our emission to allow us to control the status of them. Therefore, we know at this moment that 72% of the total NOx emission occurring when vessels are on berth. So it's clear that we have focused our efforts in accelerate our electrification plan to achieve our goals. Our discussion today will be focused on challenge and lesson learned on OPS adoption. We have been a lot of years working in OPS, and the last 2 years we can say that we have accelerated our plan. My intention is to speak during the presentation about the main topics, about the main challenge that we have faced during this process, and to explain you where we are. And the idea overall is highlight the main aspects. We are, as you have seen, working in a complete smart grid for our port. We have calculated the demand that we need, and we decide try to arrive to all the different keys of the port. So the two important first challenge that we have to deal with is, first of all, to calculate this demand, because not all the time the information from the vessel part is, we have not this information. I think that it also is something that it has said. And the other big challenge is where you can get this power demand. So in our case, we have a very good news. That was that we have a point from our from our electrical transport network, in which we can connect it. So we can design an progressive implementation plan to arrive to the different keys. How to do this? This is another challenge. How decide how to do it? No, in our case, we don't have a grid. Electrical grid belongs to the port, so we can't integrate in existing one. Otherwise, normally it's not possible because the existing one are not prepared for this kind of consumptions. But what we decide to do is to develop our smart grid. So what we are going to do, and this is a big challenge for us, is to connect to this substation in high voltage, 220 kilovolts, arrive into the port, and inside the port to build a new substation only for to transform from 220 up to 25 kilovolts. So with 25 kilovolts, we will arrive to the rest of the port. First of all, we will arrive here to our adosado quay. Why here? Because here docks our cruises. Here we can dock up to 7 cruises at the same time. So it's a huge challenge because we need around 50 megawatts to give it 90% of the services. Deploy this smart grid is important and could be solve our challenge. But what happened that the request of these 80 megawatts is a very long process. It's a very long process with our utilities, our electrical network, etc., etc. So we are progressing in this path, but we can't stay without doing anything. So what we decide to do, we decide to develop 2 pilot projects, and this is the 2 projects where we are working at this moment, and this are on the way. So where these 2 pilot projects? Pues then in the 2 places in the port where we found the electricity, the power demand enough to develop the project. That was Invest Terminal, is in the south part. I can show you in the south part of the port, and the other pilot project we are going to develop in the north part of the city, very close to the city. You know, the city of Barcelona is over there, but is overall this part is the Ramblas, etc. So I will explain to you a little how we are going to develop this project and what are the challenges that we are facing and the lesson learned in this both terminal. In case of Best Terminal, this is our automatical terminal, semi-automatical terminal that belongs to Hutchinson Group. And when we sit down with them, and again, another challenge is the communication with all the stakeholders, also the terminal, of course, the ship owners, the whole port community. But this is for us a point that is the clue for developing this project in a very efficient way. Well, when we sit down with them the first time, we see that it's not possible to stop the operation here, but from the point of view of the civil works, it's really hard to arrive to this part of the terminal. So we decided to say the pilot project in this part of the terminal, that they are already building or continue the building of the terminal. So was more easy from the civil works point of view to develop the project here. What kind of project we are going to develop? We are going to test during 2 years 2 OPS. So we are going to install 2 OPS. We will give 2 different points of connection, so we can we can test vessels that doesn't consume much more than 3.5 MVA, and later on, if we close, as you can see, if we close here, we can use the whole system in order to give the vessel 7.5 MVA. So the idea is to test versatility, to test flexibility, and to see also how is the curve in the vessel of consumption, the peak demand, etc., etc. Challenge that we have faced during this process. Well, what we have done is to tender a turnkey project, and in this turnkey project, everything is included from the project, the construction project up to the construction, and also the connection, disconnection, and maintenance during the time of the pilot. So for us was really difficult to define all the things, all the requirements that we need before launching the tender. And that is where we find a challenge with for example, the civil works, a challenge with the pits, with the challenge in order to design a compatible system with a cable management system that will be compatible with the operative and existing operative, etc., etc. And again, where the hatch is in the vessel, where the position, etc., etc. That means a lot of investment more and a lot of problems in time that you are designing. The good thing is that after tendering, we have a tenderer. We are developing the project with PowerCon in our best terminal. We are starting, and we will have the first vessel. We are expecting to have the first vessel with OPS in container in 2020, in beginning of 2024. So we are working a lot, but really, really happy with this. The other pilot we are developing in one of our ferry terminal. In this part of the port, we only have access to book with our utility 2.5 megawatts. So this means that we can't supply more than one of our ferry vessel at the same time. Here we have different traffics, but normally, or the majority are with our Balearic Island. So the vessel are around 1.5, 1.8 megawatts. What we have designed is a system that allows us to offer both 50 and 60 hertz and both 6.6 kilovolts and 11 kilovolts. So we have designed the system with flexibility. The system prepared also for the future, but at this moment with this power, we only can use to give to one vessel in we have 2 points, so 2 different berths, but only one vessel at the same time. This project we have tendered exactly in the same way that we did the other in containers. We closed 2 days ago the tender, so now all the offers are on my table in order to be checked and to see who is the tenderer. But we are very, very happy because we have received a lot of offers. In this case, another challenge that we have faced too is that we have no ship owners, we have no vessels ready for OPS. So we also have to work this part from the beginning, because we can, it's no sense to develop a system, to develop a pilot, but if you finish and you don't have the ship owner ready for OPS, so we spoke and arrived to an agreement with Grimaldi Group. This is one of our customers, our big ship owners, and they are committed to sustainability, and they decide to sign an agreement with us, with the Port of Barcelona, that we signed last February, I think so, and they are going to refit at least one of these vessels to be prepared for our OPS pilot when we will have ready. So the problem is that we have, not the problem, the challenge is that we have to provide the maximum flexibility as possible, and we don't know where are the hatch, where are the things. So this is more or less what we have done very, very fast, no? in our port in these 2 or 2.5 years. In 2024, we will have the 2 pilots. So I hope I can share also with you the lesson learned and the best practice that we will going to achieve, because the idea of these pilots is just to learn and to share these lesson learned with the rest of port, because for us we think that is really, really important. And just for finishing and summarize all the challenges that I have been mentioned, and not only myself, also my colleagues, I think that we can summarize in this one. No, the technicals, I think is important. The estimated energy, the civil works in existing terminal is difficult. One of the lessons learned that we have learned is that in the new terminals or in the new project that you develop in the ports, you should consider that you have to do trench for the future. The technical requirements according to the type of vessel. So you have to be very careful with this, and overall to the flexibility. But again, I think Captain David has told the flexibility from the port part we can offer, not all the time, but we can offer flexibility. But this flexibility means a lot more of investment, maybe for doing 1, 2, 3 calls in the year. So speak about this, try to develop something about this, because the fleet dimension, we need also to develop this part a little more. Under my opinion, I think that we need fleet real data. We need to share this. I am also aware that the ship owners are quite committed now with the OPS. Things has changed a lot in the last period. We keep contact with all of them, and we think that is really different now, but we need to develop requirements in order to optimize the system on the key. Also, I'm a little worried, and I see what happened during the pilots, but with the communication processes, I would like to do a very automatic communication process. I think that it could be, it's in the guide, in the EMSA guide also, etc. But we have to test also this in a very good way. The regulatory dimension, well, I think I come back to what Walter has said in the beginning of this workshop. No, we need a tax exception. We can say also later on, but we need also regulatory harmonization of the regulation. Also, I think Johan, you has also commented this point, but for us it's really important. The legislation, for example, in our country only says that the OPS is a directive or a disposition into a directive that says that we as Port Authority can supply electricity to the vessel for OPS, but the electrical regulation is very tight. The port regulation sometimes doesn't understand the electrical and in the other way. So, well, we have a lot of work also to do this. What to say about the business model dimension? Well, I think that this is also a hard path to to do it. From our point of view, in the pilots, we have decided a business model. For the rest of the port, we are already deciding. We are studying a lot of possibilities, a lot of things. And we don't know at the moment what we are going to do. The only thing that we think that is very important is that the energy is going to be a key factor for the competitiveness of the ports in the future. So it seems that Port Authority, for our point of view, should be involved in this kind of development as main players. The calendar, I passed this very tight. 2030 is tomorrow, so we have to run. and we have to simplify the administrative burdens. We have to fight to do this because it's important to accelerate this process, and we have to do it because these are not fast processes. And from the economical point of view, I think that we need funding. We need a tax exception for the OPS, and it's very important to have a different composition for electricity price for OPS. So just last slide. I am not going even pass through this. I think here are summarized some of the points that maybe we can speak about them during our debate or during our roundtable. So thank you very much to all of you.
Thank you very much, Anna. Thank you for your presentation and presenting the business model for the Port of Barcelona for OPS development. And I think it was really giving me somehow also the opportunity now to reach out to, let's say, to the participants of our workshop today. Because we have seen three business models of three major ports in the EU. And I think I would summarize it up a little bit as regards the challenges. I think we see a lot of technical challenges, financial challenges, and regulatory challenges. And with this, I would like to open the floor for you. I know that we have other ports as well registered. Many of you are online, but also here. So before going to the details, I would like to make a question to all of you. So in relation to the challenges identified, and we all see that we have the problem of integration. We have the problem of integration with the already ship or port infrastructure or the ship-port interface, how it needs to be addressed in developing OPS capacity. What is the role of the ports in this? How ports should address this challenge, and what the ports would expect from the public or EU institutions, from the regulators, from EMSA in this case, and of course we have Commission as well in the panel here as well. So what would you expect from the Commission also, and from the EU institutions? So the floor is open. And I would like first maybe from here, who would break the ice? It almost feels like Friday, of course, and for many of you, I know that you will be traveling back, and it is challenging, but still I think we have some time to, and you should take advantage as well from the presence of some of the colleagues here as well. So I see Espo. Yes, please.
Thank you, and thank you also to all the ESPO member ports for their very, very interesting presentations on the state of play, showing, I think, very clearly that many ports are already taking a lot of initiatives to deploy OPS. Maybe just to reiterate and underscore some of the key challenges we see and some of the solutions that we have proposed as ESPO as well, that there is still time to include in the final legislation to be agreed between member states and Parliament. The issue of having captive demand, I think, is part and parcel of what we need to deploy OPS effectively in ports. So we need to make sure that whatever we supply in ports is also then being used by shipping companies, and to that extent we want to see both soft and hard measures to ensure that. Of course, a requirement to actually use it by 2030 is very welcome. That needs to be waterproof. There should be no means for shipping companies to avoid the requirement if they qualify for it. Of course, also to have a structured coordination mechanism in place would be very welcome and something that we will continue to push for. Maybe also to note that as ESPO, we've also said that if a ship has OPS before 2030 and the port is ready to supply it, that should also then be sort of very low-hanging fruit for those two to match up and to connect already before 2030 to allow front runners to be rewarded, but also to make sure that you can start getting some of the initial childhood sicknesses, so to speak, out of the way, so that you can be ready to connect fully by 2030. Those are just some elements, and of course there are then on top of that standardization efforts that could be done. But for us, I think really making sure that you have the shipping companies at the table, giving them both carrot and sticks to make sure that they are speaking to the ports, I think will be key to unlocking this whole deployment of OPS. Thank you.
Thank you, Espo. So how to enable the uptake, but also the early runners or the early movers in this relation? I think the Commission would like to, yes, please.
Thank you. Quick word to congratulate Port of Hamburg, Malta, and also Port of Barcelona for the presentations. I have one comment for the pre-2030 incentives for ships to connect. In the Fuel EU, connection to onshore power supply and electricity from onshore power supply will count as zero greenhouse gas intensity, so which is not exactly true because there is carbon intensity in the electricity, but it's a promotion measure to use the onshore power connection even before 2030. So when the regulation enters in force in 2025, the operators will already have a reward for using onshore power supply, and therefore that works as an incentive. The obligation comes in 2030, but there's already an incentive for the connection. One question to all the ports that presented. How do you approach the calculation of the estimated power demand that in the end is let's say the core figure that will serve as design driver for the installation? So how do you calculate it? Based on historic fuel consumption, based on interviews or surveys with the operators, or a variety of these? And associated to this question, how do you, and to what Walter also commented about utilization of the installations, how do you ensure that you minimize underutilization of the installed shore power installations, of the installed power? Thank you.
Yes,
Barcelona. Yes. Well, thank you for the question. We made a very long study, a very huge study to adapt all the data that we have to the different models for calculation. At the end, what we tried to do was adapt the different type of vessel to the model that which we can stay more comfortable. But to finalize of defining everything, what we do was speaking with the ship owner and sign with them NDA. So we have some real data and we can compare all the data. So we think that with this and with the normative, we have a very accurate estimation. But we will see. The pilot will give us the results also, and will give us new inputs to recalculate this if it's necessary. But what we do normally is iterate in this way.
Maybe I also can say some words on that. I mentioned the greenhouse gas study from the IMOR in my presentation. They have some numbers in there, which are quite broadly, but it's a good first estimation how many a certain ship type is using at the berth. And of course, we also talk to the ship owners if they have data available. Some of them reply, some of them not. So yeah, at the end of the day, we don't know the exact amount of energy all the ships are using in the port. And we just will figure out if we're providing energy to them or they gave us all their data. But yeah, that's pretty hard to get this data. Thank you.
Malta, you want to? Yes.
Yes, I think the best source is, as already was mentioned, is when you talk directly to your prospective clients, being the shipping lines. In our case, we in the cruise and container industry, like with my colleagues from the other two ports, we're talking with liner services where we have a pretty good idea of the ships or the category of ships and the number of ship calls. And by talking directly to the engineering side of those shipping lines, you get realistic information. For example, one useful piece of information that we received was that in respect of cruise liners, once you actually get the connection and the ship switches off certain machinery, then the power demand is actually goes down. But you're also then have to calculate that in respect of a typical ship call, for example, for a cruise liner, if you allow the 1 hour for connection and 1 hour for disconnection, you're talking about a 10-hour port stay out of 24. So the information, yeah, it's there, it can be worked out. On the aspect of utility, I think at this stage of OPS being introduced, we cannot expect full maximization and full utility and ships queuing up to connect to shore supply, as our colleague from Hamburg also mentioned the concern of underutility. So I think this has to be looked at long term, where it has to be a package of competitiveness and services rendered from the port, affordability, commitment from the shipping lines in a consolidated and coordinated regulatory framework where everyone should be a winner at the end. But I think it's works in progress for all of us, and we rely, as usual, on support from agencies like EMSA from the technical aspect, the political aspect, as we know from our MEPs and the Commission. So I think it's a mixture of a number of factors where I think for the first time and in this particular area, everyone seems to be on board to make this a success.
Thank you, Malta, and a very positive message as well. And this is, of course, a cooperative process and effort. And I don't know, Commission, would you like to have? Yes.
Yes, thank you. There were many interesting points raised. So first of all, congratulations to all the ports for that presented for their very good initiatives and for the way of going ahead. I really liked this spirit of yes, we can do it. There are challenges, of course. Nobody's expecting that we would be going to such an undertaking without having challenges. I very much agree with your comment, David, that we are all on board and that we're all on the same page. Some small remarks from my side. First of all, we have to remember that this is not actually the OPS is not something that's going to happen in your port only. This is going to happen in all the ports around. The ships that want to come to Europe will have to use OPS. So there is a level playing field. Now, understandably, if you're really the first in line and you're waiting what's going to happen until 2030. There is this incentive there, but it's very, very difficult to say, to oblige something before. Many raised the funding aspects, and that is, of course, normal and understanding. But again, the vessels will have to connect, the vessels will have to pay. The demand is going to be, the captive demand is going to be there. Coca-Cola doesn't have that. You will. And we agree with Walter on this, really. Then, OPS, as I said earlier, is a service under the Port Services Regulation. So if the Port Authority decides to provide OPS, then you do it as an internal provider. There is also the option to have a concession, as you would do for any other port service. So there is also another business model and another dimension. However, public funding, yes, there are different tools available. I mentioned CEF in my speech before, but we have regional funding and we have EIB. Admittedly, not every of these funding tool is ideal for every port. Some of the smaller ports might find it suitable and better to go to regional funds. Bigger ports with massive investment needs, for them, EIB might be a better way. So there are pathways there, but I don't think we can expect that we're going to, not only us, every sector in the economy, we can expect that we're going to decarbonize without some cost somewhere. The transition period and exemptions here and there and all other aspects coming in, we have to keep in mind that we should not, we have an ambition, we have a goal. We should go and reach for the goal and not endanger it. And what I really liked was listening your approaches, that you're trying to find the solutions to these challenges. And here for the technical aspects, again, there is funding from the EU, the Horizon calls that you can go to. And it would be really great if we can have solutions that, we can find all these flexible things, solutions that can work, as you mentioned, Hamburg, in these very tight quarters that you have, that then this solution can actually be used in other ports around Europe. So we are doing our best to support you in this understandably difficult endeavor. There has to be homework to be done by the port authorities. As I said, you're the maestros. You have to conduct the orchestra in the port. You know the technical details. It's not up to Brussels to decide and make all the details for you. And you're not alone. It's also the member states. Under AFIR, the member states have the final responsibility. And that is also the member states that are dealing with the legislation for the provision of electricity in general, the grids and all that. So there is also a big role for the member state to play there, which means that we need to have discussions with the national authorities, and we need to have discussions, as you very well said, with the clients, the ship owners, and other players in the port area. Of course, if you decide to make this installation, there are probably going to be a lot of people that are going to scream because cables have been cut. And yes, we have, you're asking Walter for another consultation mechanism. We have it. Use it. It's in the Port Services Regulation. Article 16. No, sorry. I don't remember. But it's in the Port Services Regulation, the consultation article. So please use it. And I'm sure, it's positive. I get this positive vibe today that there's a goodwill and the willingness to go ahead. Are there challenges? I think we're going to get through them. I'm very positive after the discussion we had today. So sorry for this rather long intervention, but thank you.
Thank you, Konstantinos. Actually, I think it was the least I can say. It was very useful, since I think it highlighted, let's say, that we have to deal with all the complex issues that we have identified, and we have to deal with them in a sort of a cooperation spirit. I think what it was, for me, it's very clear that the Commission has undertaken a lot of efforts, has undertaken, let's say, a lot of initiatives for legislative proposals, measures. There are financing instruments that are available for you, but most here today, because after all, from our side, we're a technical agency, and what we wanted to do is to bring you together, to give us an understanding of your challenges, what you are facing in your daily business, how you address the challenges, what you see ahead for the coming years until 2030 or even beyond. And I think this is what makes it useful, today's discussion. And finally, I would say to this positive spirit I got, it was David's intervention, but I think we all agree that we're all on the same boat. We're all on board on this, and it's a collective effort. And with this, I think we're slowly coming to the closure of this almost 3-day journey, which started from the day one, specifically with the studies that we have compiled, conducted, and presented as EMSA, and then the discussion on all the solutions in terms of alternative fuels. Then we came to safety, and today we're closing the discussion in relation to electrification for ports. So I'm very happy to ask my colleague from the Unit of Sustainability, Head of Unit for Sustainability, Frederick, to say a few words as regards the discussion we had on sustainability before closing the session.
Thank you, Ioannis. I think that I will repeat what we have a previous speaker have just said, because I think that the main word that we had during these 3 days is that it's a collective work. And definitely from all the side of the room, from the fuel provider, from the ship owners, from the port, from the engine manufacturer, there is a will to go ahead. Because some people have, I think, quietly, correctly said that it's not an evolution for the present time for the shipping, it's a revolution. And we need to be all on board for that. What I take out of this very interesting 3 days is that solutions are already identified. They are currently not all at the same level of maturity, but quick progress is made, thanks to some also some funding opportunities. But there is a need which came from all the side of the room for acting on the standard. So I think that it is our next priority. And for this, I will send you back to the 2 studies that have been presented to you during these days, because you will find at the end a list, which is already, I will say, quite a step forward of the points that need to be addressed. And I hope that we will be able to bring this issue at a higher level. Definitely, if we can manage to get new standards approved by the IMO, everybody will be more than happy. It will keep the level playing field in the industry. And the last point that I took also is that definitely there is a need to finance this transition. And there are already instruments. Maybe they are not so well known, so maybe we will think about, see if we can facilitate, as it is the role of EMSA, to bring together people. For my unit, and the next steps will be that we will continue working on trying to provide information on other potential alternative fuels. Hydrogen studies already, I will say, in the making, and we will start some others in the coming month. And also one side that was illustrated in particular for some of this alternative fuel, because it's also part of the mandate of EMSA, we will also work on the other side, I will say the dark side of using fuels, how this fuel will react when they are released on the marine environment, and how EMSA should adapt its pollution response tool in order to be ready for this new period. And with that, I will stop and I give you back the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Frederick. I think we're almost about to close the session. I would say that, as you have highlighted, we have all identified that it's very, very important for the industry to work with clear technical rules and with recognized and accepted standards. And this is something that we have touched upon also in the session about safety. And this was made clear that one of the enablers, apart from all the other challenges that the maritime sector is facing, is, and I would say at the bottom of it, is safety. And this is why we tried to address, at the same time that we are talking about the technical developments, the technology, and all the other challenges, we tried to address safety on as the basis in order to enable further development, further growth in relation to the new technologies, to the new alternative fuels, and of course, all the other possibilities we have in this path for decarbonization, for greening the sector, and for addressing climate change as well. With this, I think we have come to the end of the journey. I think what I would like to share with you is that we will share. Of course, we will check with the presenters, but then we will try to share with you the presentations and, of course, the report for the workshop. So this is, bear with us. There will be some things, something to follow up. I would like to thank all of you individually, those of you who took the effort to come to Lisbon, although it was a rainy Lisbon these couple of days, not like we are used to, but still, I think it was very useful. We had almost 3 days of extensive but very useful discussions. I would like to thank particularly the presenters and the high-level speakers that came here, that took the effort to came here, or they presented from online, for the very interesting presentations that contributed to our discussions. Finally, the Commission, who honored us being here today and the previous days as well, IMO as well. They were all here, and to give you also the perspective from the public institutions and, of course, representatives from the member states. And with this, and finally, last but not least, I would like to thank, first of all, the management of EMSA, who took the initiative to organize this workshop, our director, who had the initiative, the concept, and worked to make this a reality. And finally, our teams, the sustainability and safety teams, who have worked very hard all these days for preparing the workshop. They did everything to make this happen, and an organizational miracle, I would say, because we had, I don't know, more than 200 participants on a daily basis participating on online as well. But that's something that we're used to here in EMSA. So thanks a lot to everybody. Thank you. For those of you who are traveling back home, have a safe trip back home, and hopefully see you around in this discussion that will continue for the coming years. Thank you.